You're listening to the weekly Dartscast. 180!
Hello and welcome to an episode of the weekly Dartscast. I'm Alex Moss, and joining me as always, my co-host, he is the local legend of Washington Cemetery to Sabine Bridge. It is darts statistician Burton DeWitt. How are you doing?
Yeah, glad to get that one back. I had it, and then I went out of town on holiday for a few days, and I lost it, but I came back and stole that one back, so I think I'm up 6-2 or 7-2 now. But I'm doing well. How are you, Alex?
Yeah, pleased you've got that one back. I'm doing okay. We're almost another month into this lockdown in the books here in the UK. Hopefully April will get some things back open again. We'll be able to move around a little bit, but let's talk about some darts. Last week we had the second lot of Super Series in the PDC. We'll start off this week's show with our first of two questions of the week that we put on Twitter, which is whose title win at the Super Series last week was the most important? We've got Brendan Dolan, Gerwyn Price, Johnny Clayton, Peter Wright. Who are you going with?
At least when I last checked the poll, it was a very close race between two of them, and the other two were far behind. But I mean, I think there is an argument for any of the four. I think you can make a convincing case that Gerwyn Price needed the title because, well, he hadn't been the same player he was when he won the World Championship just a couple months ago. It's not that he'd been poor or anything. He only made the semifinals of a major just a couple weeks ago. But he hadn't yet won a title, and he hadn't yet won a title as the world number one, as the world champion. And that's something that, as the season went on, would have started affecting him. So to get a title is definitely big for him. Obviously, for Peter Wright as well, that's, I think, probably the most, I think that's the answer I will go with, so I'll come back to him. But, you know, you can even make a case for Johnny Clayton, just because now people are, and he's seeing himself as one of the best players in Planet Darts. And, okay, he played okay on the first day, but he struggled on the second day, especially after the first round, and ended up getting pummeled by Mervyn King in the board final. To be able to come back the following day and to pretty much improve as the day goes on and win that title, to show that, you know, he is still that player he was the previous week when he won an event and was runner-up in two others, I think was big for him. And it's something you can overlook since he already has a couple titles this year, including his first singles major title. But to keep that going was big for him. So that leaves us, though, with Brendan Dolan and with Peter Wright. I'm going to surprise some people and say I don't think Brendan Dolan needed to win that title. Okay, sure, he's the lowest ranked of the four players. Sure, he didn't have the best first set of four players championship events at the first Super Series. Only won 2 matches across the 4 days. But I don't think Brendan Dolan needed a title for anything other than to maybe put himself in position to get back to the Grand Slam, depending on what happens the rest of the year. Because he's going to make the other televised events, and he's playing well enough that he's going to be able to get good runs in more often than not. And I think even if he didn't win the title on the first day, maybe he wouldn't have made 2 semifinals in the next 3, but he would have had every chance to. And I think that in and of itself is why he didn't need to win the title. He has confidence he's never had before. He has a mojo about him that he hasn't had in years. And he's probably playing the best he ever had. A title is great for him. A title, well, who doesn't want to win a PDC title? But he didn't need to, because he already had the confidence. He already had the belief that for the longest time was missing. Winning a title just makes him more dangerous, if anything, assuming he doesn't lose his hunger, and it doesn't seem like he did based on how he played the next 3 days. So assuming he doesn't lose his hunger, it just makes him more dangerous. But he already had the confidence. He already had the belief. He already was playing at the level needed. Therefore, he didn't need to win a title. Peter Wright needed to win a title because Peter Wright had been struggling. Going back to the World Championships, start of the season, the Masters, the UK Open, the first, 7 Players' Championship events, especially the first 5. He started to play well in the 6th one, winning his board and having 3 10-plus averages, and that's probably the best we'd seen from him all year. But I think he needed a title before things really started to get out of control. He's a player who's inconsistent's not necessarily the right word, but has consistently is able to have long runs where he struggles and then immediately right the ship, although him struggling is still a top 16 player. But he needed a title to show that he's still one of the top 3, and I think he did that. So I'm going to say Peter Wright needed it the most, because the other three you can make a case for, but they didn't need it. Peter Wright needed a title.
I'm going to go with Peter Wright as well, but I'll give a mention to a few of the others as well, and a few of you guys listening have been in touch as well on our poll on Twitter. We've got Kieran Morby, who says Gezi Price all day long, but only for mental purposes. Gezi not feeling himself lately and feels the hype has gone out of the game to the point it was all getting a bit boring without fans. I think that win fathomed a bit of hunger again and got his mind focused for the Premier League. So a few people going with Gerwyn Price, few people going with Brendan Dolan, as you mentioned on that poll. It is very close at the moment when we're recording, 42% with Brendan Dolan, 44% going with Peter Wright. And I'll give a mention to Brendan Dolan as well, because what a run it was to that title that on the first day of the Super Series last week. After 5 games of the day, he was averaging 104.79, which if he'd have kept that up would have been the second highest Players' Championship tournament winning average we've ever seen during the Dart Connect era, if you like. So he was playing an exceptional level, and okay, dipped a little bit for the last couple of games, but he was still able to get over the line and get the title. And when we did our World Championship recap show, we said which players will be the most disappointed that they didn't get their hands on the Sid Waddell Trophy. You mentioned Brendan Dolan, and I'll be honest, I raised an eyebrow to that. I'm sure a few of our listeners did as well, but you made a great point. He was very close to knocking out Gerwyn Price, who went on to win the title in that tournament, and he has been playing well for a little while now. He's sped up his throw a little bit, has been well documented during the World Championship, and he's kept it going, and the results speak for themselves. He's got another title. Not many players have won more titles on the floor since he won his first one in 2013, so he's a player that is capable of winning these titles on the floor, and he's on the verge of getting back in the top 32. Can he get back in the top 16? That's for another conversation, but you'd certainly back him to get back in that top 32 sooner rather than later. But like you, I'm going to go with Peter Wright as well, because it has been a difficult time for him. And we spoke on the show last week before this Super Series. There are a lot of players coming up for this Premier League season that were in need of a big week. Peter Wright was one of them. The first Super Series, he had a 76 average, and then the next day he goes and averages 105 in his first game. A few averages dipping below the 90. So he's someone that in previous years you'd bank on him having that consistent high 90s, low 100 average, and it was just all over the place. And a lot of that, I guess, is down to the different changes in equipment. He was using various different darts, but on that final day, the consistency was there over the last 3 days. As you mentioned, he was playing pretty well towards the end of the 4 days. So I'll definitely go with Peter Wright as well. It was good for him to get that title under his belt, beat the world number one Gerwyn Price in the final as well. Going into this Premier League, it will do his confidence the world of good to get that win.
Yes, we should say, as of the time of recording, the world number 2 Peter Wright, as he's now ahead of Michael van Gerwen only for a week. Now, we talked about the 4 title winners from the second Super Series of Milton Keynes, but outside of those 4, who else caught your eye last week?
There's a lot to mention, I think. I'll try and name maybe 4 or 5, so I'll leave you with some to mention, but some that jump off the page straight away. Luke Humphries, we had him on after his run to the UK Open final, his first PDC senior final, and we were talking about can he now make that next step and start going deeper regularly on these Pro Tour events, get him into the other big events on TV, and look what he's done in the last week. He makes another final. His first game after that UK Open final against Jelle Klaassen. Such a shame that this game wasn't on one of the streaming boards, because looking at the stats on Dart Connect, it looked like one of those games that you'd go back and watch time and time again. Luke averaging 106, Jelle averaging 102. Good to see Jelle playing well again. Luke gets over the line 6-5 in the end, but he's got to a final. He's got to a couple of last 32s, and he's now only, I think, £750 off the World Match Play provisional spots on the Pro Tour. So he's put himself firmly in contention without winning the title, which would have put him in there after the week, but he's right in contention now, which is good for him. A couple other players I'll give a mention to. Scott Mitchell, we saw him a lot on the Pro Tour last year because of how well he did on that first weekend on the Challenge Tour. Had some good results, maybe didn't go deep in many of the events. He didn't get into any last 16s. He had a few last 32s, last 64s, but got over that line eventually last week, getting to his first last 16. And what does he do? He goes quarter final, last 16, last 16, last 32. So some good runs for Scott there. And one other player I'll give a mention to is Jamie Hughes. You mentioned him last week saying that he needed a good week. He's recently had his surgery on his elbow, and good to see him get on a couple of good runs last week. A semi-final, leaves himself, I think he had 20 left in the decider against Luke Humphries, and Luke pulls off the 1-2-2 finish, which I'm sure will have been a tough one to take for Jamie Hughes, but he's heading back in the right direction after what's been a difficult end to 2020 with his injury and start to the year not being able to play. But looks like he's getting back to somewhere near the form that he showed in his first spell here in the PDC. Yeah,
in fact, another player that I mentioned needing a good run only when I made the final on the first day in Michael Smith. Obviously impressive, but I'll focus on some of the people who didn't make the finals, and I'll start with someone who doesn't even have a tour card. Robbie John Rodriguez played at a tour card standard, without question, at both Super Series so far, but he really upped his game in the second Super Series, winning 7 matches across the 4 days, reaching the board final on 3 of the 4 days, and of those 7 wins, 6 are over top 32 players. He beat Peter Wright, he beat Daryl Gurney, he beat Dimitri Vandenberg, he beat Stephen Bunting, he beat Simon Whitlock. Sorry, 5, I should say, of the 7 over top 32 players. So maybe I should learn how to count. Still, that's still not a bad return to average more than 1 win a day over a top 32 player when you're not a tour card holder. It's why so far he's right there at the upper quartet of players in terms of averages. Of 132 players who played in Players' Championship events this year, he's 33rd. That's right there, the last player on the top quarter of the people who've played the 2 Super Series event. And deservingly so based on, the scalps that he's had. Other players who impressed me who didn't win the title, I have to go with someone who did win a title at the first weekend, didn't at the second, but kept up the standard that he's been showing now for months, and it's why he's the Pro Tour #1, Joe Cullen. Yes, he didn't even make a final this time, but he made 2 semifinals, going up to the champion on the first event and going out to the champion in the last event. In between, he also won his board going out to Brendan Dolan, who, as we discussed, had a pretty darn good week, I should say. And then, he went out second round the other day, but didn't play poorly. Still, across the 4 days, he averaged over a ton 7 times, including a 111 in just an absurd match against Max Hopp. Max Hopp's had a few of those this year. Max Hopp is playing well, but is running into some monster performances. Granted, so are so many other people. But I have to throw out Joe Cullen. Even though he didn't win a title, he was impressive. He's continued to show why he is the Pro Tour #1. And then have to leave it off, though, with the player who is, in terms of averages, currently #1 in the Players' Championship events, Dirk van Dijvenbode. He's picked up where he left off last year, if not better. 2 more quarterfinals in the first 2 days, and that includes some just beautiful performances. Nearly 110 against Mickey Mansell, nearly 107 against Kirk Shepard, 113 in a match that was one of the best matches of the week against Mensur Suljovic. He was up in that match. He was down in that match 5-3 and having to break twice in the last 3 legs. And he throws in a pair of 11 darters to get it back to level. And Mensur Suljovic missed a couple darts to win the match in the deciding leg, but still a 15 darter. All but one of those legs won in under 15 darts. That was a leg that Mensur won in 17, where Dirk van Dijvenbode got stuck in the madhouse. So, just an absurdly high-quality match from both of them, and it just shows you how good Dirk van Dijvenbode has got. Did get a little fortunate, and it's weird that you say someone averages 113 and gets fortunate, but that was a standard they were both playing at, and for Dirk van Dijvenbode, it's a standard he's been playing at for over a year now. It's why he is one of the best players in the world right now.
And you mentioning Dirk van Dijvenbode as well just triggered my memory. I'd be remiss not to give a mention to Aaron Beeney as well, averaging 99, his highest average in the PDC, to beat Dirk van Dijvenbode this week. But let's move on to our first guest on this week's show. He is the manager of Brendan Dolan, Jake Jones, a few other players on the circuit as well. Here's our chat with Will Adamson. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the manager of the Cleveland Arms Sports Limited, Will Adamson. Thanks for the time, Will. How are you doing?
Very well today, thank you.
Good to hear. And there's only one place to start, isn't there? And that is with one of the players in your stable, Brendan Dolan, winning a title at the Super Series last week. What does this latest title mean to Brendan?
I think it's well deserved. It's been playing well for over a year now. The hard work that he's put in, he deserves the ring he gets now.
Well documented during the World Championship that Brendan had sped up his throw a little bit and he pushed Going Price, the eventual win, all the way in the early rounds. What have you made of the change and how it's helped Brendan's game?
I think Brendan gets a lot of unfair stick for being a slow player, to be fair. You know, if I'm being totally honest, I think now that he's got a little bit of a quicker throw, he's got more rhythm to his throw as well. And his scoring is phenomenal at the moment. When he's on, he's now treble 20, treble 20. He's fantastic on the 19s, and his finishing has been superb.
We'll come back to your players a bit later, but let's chat a little bit about you. What are your first memories of darts?
First memories of darts, I'd probably turn around and say watching the lakeside on the telly. You know, I'm being very, very honest. My mum and dad used to like to watch the darts when Bristow and Jockey Wilson were playing. That was probably my earliest memories of darts, really.
And before becoming a darts manager, did you have any other involvement in darts before then? Did you play much yourself?
I probably took part. Like most kids of my age, I would turn around and say I played darts around Christmas time in January, a little bit in July, and that would be about it.
And what got you into the world of managing dart players? How did it come about, and who were the first players that you managed?
Absolute fluke, to be fair. I was playing a lot of pool for Northern Ireland, and then playing on the main tour, and we were out in Northern Ireland, and a guy called Ronnie Boyle, he said to me, you like a bit of darts, don't you? And he was putting on competitions and that, and he introduced me to Wayne Mardle, who I then booked for an exhibition to come to my mum and dad's pub, and that is realistically how I got into darts.
So from booking players for exhibitions, how did it come about then you being a manager for players?
I broke my collarbone when I was on my honeymoon through playing football, and I couldn't play pool for about, I think it was 6-7 months, and I got in touch with Wayne Mardle, who sort of like, he fell out with his sponsors. Can you sort a sponsorship deal out for me? And we got that, and from there I got involved with a few other players. It just seemed to snowball, and I never went back to playing pool again.
You're in partnership with Mac Elkin, who our listeners voted as the Manager of the Year for 2020. How did going into business with Mac happen, and how does that partnership work?
How does that partnership work? Mac's like, he's the main man. He looks after what I call the Real Madrid team, and I'll look after the Real Madrid B team, where players get to a certain level and move straight up again. You know, and we've got a lot of young players in our team at the minute, and then you look at the more experienced players like James Richardson, Robert Owen, and that, who've had good careers and have just been a little bit unlucky. And I think when they come back again and get back on the main tour, they'll kick on more and more.
Definitely. We'll come on to talk about more recent times in a moment. But what have been the highlights so far as a manager? What moments stick out for you?
I suppose with Macca, when Glenn won the world title, was brilliant. James Richardson's been a good one when he's won the online tournaments. I've enjoyed that. And him winning the European title, the Mad European title this year, was a good one. Obviously, when Mickey Mansell was with it, he won a Players' Championship as well. That was a good achievement for him.
You mentioned the online darts. We've seen a lot of that over the last 12 months, and looking back at the last year when things first got shut down, what was that like, having all the plans that you had for 2020 postponed, and I guess the uncertainty that came with it at the time?
Well, 2020 started really well for us, to be fair. You know, take away Q School, Ryan Hogarth, Justin Hood, both made semi-finals on the first Challenge Tour. Brendan had a really good couple of opening weeks in the Players' Championships. Dom Taylor was called into that. He'd won 3 games on that. Brian Roman got involved in it. He won a game on the Players' Championship, and then all of a sudden, from planning for flights, hotels, for the rest of the year, it just seemed to stop. How can I explain it? From being hands-on and doing things, there was nothing, and we thought 3 or 4 weeks this will be, it'll be all over, and it just didn't. It just seemed to carry on and carry on.
Yeah, we've seen restrictions come in and come out over the last year. How have you found the organising part of being a manager? Has that part been tricky at times?
Yeah, it's been very tricky at times, to be fair, but I'm quite lucky in one respect. I've only got Brian Roman, who's based in Belgium. Most of my players are based in the UK or Ireland. So it's not as much as Mac would have getting players in from Spain, Portugal, Holland, Belgium and Sweden. That would take some doing.
Yeah, and we saw you on Twitter as well. You stocked up pretty good when you went to the Winter Series in Coventry last year. How long did it take you to get through all those snacks?
Oh, about a day, to be fair. I've got a bit of a sweet tooth when it comes to chocolate.
And we're all used to how these events are run now by the PDC with the bubbles behind closed doors at the moment. We recently had the big one, the World Championship at Ali Pali. What was that experience like being there for that?
Strange. We were lucky enough to be there on the first night when there was a small crowd of 250 when Diogo was playing Steve Beaton. And it was like a surreal thing. Because then years before, the crowd there, it's brilliant. It's just an atmosphere that you want to be involved in. You look forward to your players playing well in. But it also can be an atmosphere when your players are playing, not up to their standard, and getting a shoe in the crowd can give you a bit of stick. And then going there this year to totally nothing, it was strange, really strange. But fair play to the PDC for getting it on.
Let's circle back to your players then. We spoke about Brendan earlier. He's closing in on a return back into the top 32 after how he played, particularly last week. What aims do you have for Brendan this year?
Oh, the only way's up for Brendan. There's no doubt about that. I'm looking forward to him getting into all the TV majors and going deep, because he certainly has the game to do it. Brendan said on interview last week that he needs to believe in himself more, and I think he's starting to do that now, because his family have certainly been behind him, and Teresa and ourselves supporting him all the way, and now he believes that little bit more. I just think he's going to go a lot deeper in tournaments.
Fingers crossed for that. Well, we should mention another tour card holder in your ranks now, the former Torremolinos Open champion, Jake Jones. What have you made of his start to life on the PDC Tour?
I think the first 4 days, the first Players' Championship, I think, the first 2 days, he drew Devon Peterson on the first day. He was 4-0 down, got back to 4-all. Even though he lost the game 6-4, I thought this boy's got something about him. He digs deep all the time. And I don't think we've seen the best of him yet. I think he can only get better. And
we had a chat with him a few weeks ago after he won his tour card at Q School, and he said that you came on board, I think it was during last year, so there wasn't a lot of darts to base it on just online, so he caught the eye online for you.
He caught it online playing Corey Cadbury, and we had a conversation about him. Then he won a few other games, and then he played one of our other players, a guy called Jamie Robinson, and beat him. To be fair, give him a good beating. To be fair, and then he was beating people up online that were really good pedigree, and we made a move for him. Normally we like to watch players, but in the flesh, but we couldn't, so we made a move for him. We got him. We watched him in the Challenge Tour this year, where he played really, really well without getting results. And then we went to obviously Q School this year, and he did enough to get through the first 3 days, paced himself well. And then when we started, he said there's more in the tank to come. And then on that Tuesday, he just kept winning and winning and winning. And there was times there where he just dug deep. And when you can keep digging deep and getting results, I think the future can be very bright for you.
Definitely, yeah. And you mentioned Q School there. We should give that a mention. You had Jake come through and get his tour card. You had a few other players involved at Q School, and it was the different format with the 2 stages. What did you think of it personally, the change? Because it was a big change to what you used to, obvious reasons with the virus. What did you think of it?
It was a huge change, to be fair. But, fair play to the PDC again for getting this on. And I liked Q School. I liked the way there was so many players going through the first 3 days, and then a break, and then so many going again. Then you had the best 1 through 8 playing for Q School. And there was no waiting around. You were ready to go, so you were coming off. You were playing again within 10 or 15 minutes. It was so brilliantly organised this year. I just hope it carries on for the next year.
We recently saw 2 of your players go head-to-head at the UK Open, Jake Jones against Don Taylor. As a manager, how do you approach games like that?
Oh, it was a nightmare draw, to be fair. It really was. It's one of those where we just had a little look on the phone. You're watching it on Darts Connect, and you just hope the best player wins. And they both do themselves justice. There's always bragging rights, I suppose, in the team when one beats another. And Jake, up to then was probably on a high coming from Q School and then playing well on the Players' Championship. Super Series. So, he was the form player going into it. But then in the first 5 legs of that match, Dom Taylor, reminded myself and Mac why we signed him.
And lastly, looking ahead, we're all hoping things are going to start to open up again soon. But what are you most looking forward to doing when the restrictions are lifted?
I'm just looking forward to getting crowds back into the darts, getting back to going to the Players' Championships, TV events. Looking forward to that and meeting a lot of the darts family again, which we haven't been able to see for over a year.
Well, we look forward to that. We'll appreciate your time, and well done again to Brendan on his win last week, and wish you and all your players all the best for the rest of the year.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Will for joining us. Now, some news to bring you, and we had an update on this year's Premier League on Monday. The whole season will be held in Milton Keynes, finishing on Friday, the 28th of May. What was your reaction when you saw the news this week?
I think it's the right call. And, unless you wanted to try to push it into the autumn and try to have it on a Tuesday or Wednesday night in October, November, this seemed to be the only thing you could do. Because even if, and it's still not been decided whether there will be crowds as we get into May for the Premier League, and hopefully there will be able to be some crowd. But we still need to make sure that there is as little travel as possible. And that means you need to do clumps of 3 or 4 matches. And if the players are going to be coming to Milton Keynes for other events anyway, it just makes sense. So I think this was something that had to get done. I'm hopeful that we will start to see crowds. Things are obviously getting better almost everywhere in the world right now. We've been saying for a while that we didn't know what will be coming in a week, what will be coming in a month. We're now finally at that time, and I think I said this a couple weeks ago, that we can start to be planning a little bit more long term than in the past. Even still, it just wouldn't be realistic to be taking this event across to multiple different places. And especially when you throw in, it's not just, players coming from Britain. You have players coming from the Netherlands. You have players coming from Belgium. You have a player, I should say, coming from each of those countries. You have a player coming from Spain. Yes, I know Jose de Sousa is Portuguese, but he lives in Spain. You can't just have him fly in for a day or two in order to play in Newcastle or to play in Liverpool or to play in Brighton. Having him come in for 4 or 5 days to play in Milton Keynes, assuming he makes it to the second stage, just makes sense. I think this was the right call. Hopefully, as we get into May, there can be some crowd there, whether it's 25%, whether it's 50%, whether it's even just 10%. Hopefully there can be some. We'll have a better sense of that in a few weeks' time. But I think this was the right call, and this prevents it from happening, dragging it out. As I said, you could have waited and tried to put the second stage in October and November and hope that things were better. But one, there's no guarantee that we would be able to realistically be going from city to city by then. And 2, there's too many events already in the autumn. It just isn't going to be realistic. And you have a televised event pretty much every weekend for the last 2 months of the season. So I think this was the right call.
A very good point you make as well with what the Premier League usually is, week in, week out, Thursday after Thursday with different cities. It's just in these circumstances not going to work. And I didn't really think about that when they announced it, but it kind of does make sense, doesn't it, in the current climate that we're in at the minute, to put these Premier Leagues, bunch them together in 3 or 4s or 5s like they are doing. So it's going to be 4 different blocks that's going to cover the Premier League. And when we look back to last year's Premier League, covered 253 days of the calendar, from the first night in Aberdeen at the P&J Live, a great time, to then fast forward 6-7 months to October behind closed doors in Coventry when we saw Glenn Durrant lift the title. It did kind of drag on a long time, and for obvious reasons we did have that 4-month break in the middle of that because of the virus, and nothing was happening during that time. So we've gone from the longest Premier League to the shortest. This one's going to be sewn up in 54 days, less than 8 weeks from the start to the finish. And I guess really in the situation that we're in, not able to have the Premier League in its original format with the 1 game a week, 1 night a week, this is the best way to do it. And as you mentioned, we could potentially see crowds come back for that second part of it. It's still up in the air at the minute. I know the PDC, their announcement, they said that they are currently discussing it. They're in talks with local authorities, if they are able to get some crowd in to the Marshall Arena, the new home of World Darts, it'd be nice for the people of Milton Keynes, because they've had all these big darts events. I know they get the Masters every year, but you think they've had the World Match Play, they've had the Premier League, they've just had the UK Open, and they've not been able to go and watch them. So I guess it would be nice for them after all of this if they are able to watch some of the Premier League towards the end of it, and the finals on the 28th on that Friday night. If we are in a better place at that point, you've got to be hopeful that we could see some sort of crowd in there for that. So yeah, I think it was the best decision, like you say. They could have dragged it on, but I think really it's a case of let's get the Premier League out of the way. It is one of them things that they are contractually obliged to do with the broadcasters to do this Premier League. So get it out of the way, get it done, and then focus second half on the year on getting some European Tour events on, getting all the other TV events on.
So you mentioned those European Tour events. Brings us to our second question of the week, and it's how many European Tour events do you think will be held this year? Not for the full year, but before we get to the World Match Play, which is currently scheduled for the 17th to 25th of July.
Well, last week I said I wasn't very confident that we'd see some European Tour events. You raised a good point that maybe we could see the one in Gibraltar, because there is the lesser big crowds, if you like, than the ones that we get in Germany and Holland and Austria. And we've had a lot of people get in touch, actually. One of the players who I'm sure will be really hoping that we do see that Gibraltar event happen is Dyson Parody. He says hopefully we could have the Gibraltar one, fingers crossed. Lock Up Dave, good friend of the show, he says interesting one with European third waves approaching. Hopefully people's answers have reflected to this. And looking at the poll at the minute, 37% agreeing with me, they're going for 0, 42% going for 1 to 2, 18% going for 3 to 4, and Dan Dawson's got quite a few accounts on Twitter, 3% going with 5+, and we'd all love to see 5+ European Tour events before the World Match Play. But there's some good points in there. We could see that Gibraltar one, which you mentioned. Maybe we could see some in the UK. I know it's a little bit alien, really, in recent times. We're used to seeing a lot of them in Germany, not used to seeing European Tour events in the UK. But I was looking back in 2013, that the UK Masters won by John Park, it was at Butlins Minehead. So there is previous of having European Tour events in the UK, and I guess really we've just spoke about the Premier League. They're not going to get the nights in Manchester, in Brighton, all across the UK. They're going to miss out on them this year. Maybe you could look to put on some weekends across the UK, call them the European Tour events, if we are in that place where the UK is ahead of other countries and they are able to have the crowds in. Maybe this year we could see some European Tour events in the UK, and I guess really there's going to be a big appetite for fans to want to go out and watch the darts. We spoke about it before. After all this time not being able to go to the events, if they can put these events on in various arenas or whatever, then sure, I think that'd be a great idea. But I think in their usual slots in Germany, you can hear from a guest in a moment, in Hungary, they're hoping to have their first one last year. It might not happen this year, or certainly not before or after the World Match Play, I think, but maybe some in the UK. Maybe we're going on a UK European tour before the World Match Play.
Yeah, and it seems like all I needed to do was wait a week, and you came around to my point of view. Or maybe we just needed Dyson Parody to my point of view, and you come around to it. I guess that is why it is the Dyson Parody experience.
Absolutely.
I'm still hopeful that there will be one or two. I think that's what I voted for with my secret Twitter, because I wanted to see the results and I didn't want to wait till the poll to end. That's also what I said last week or the week before. I thought there would be one or two. I think Gibraltar makes sense. And I think what you said, having one in the UK might make the most sense. Or having one, well, doesn't have, it could be in the Netherlands or Germany. They're doing, of course, a Super Series in Germany. So I think there is still the opportunity, depending on what local authorities say or what local authorities are willing to allow, if you have that ability to get 25% capacity, I think it's worth making sure an event goes forward. Especially like Gibraltar makes the most sense, because that's probably what you would get anyway at best. But to do it somewhere else, just get something going, I think would be really good. And also to be able to get the European Tour season started, to get a couple of events with that £25,000 first prize available for players to compete for, make a big difference, and will open up some opportunities for the real stage players to get some ranking money towards qualification for the World Match Play and the World Grand Prix, but more importantly the World Match Play, because that's coming up sooner. So I still think there will be one or two. Otherwise, how are you going to fit them all in September and October? I don't think you will, unless we're going to cancel the World Series again and try to get them all in August. So I still think we'll get one or two in. Where they will be is to be determined. Whether there'll be a crowd, that's to be determined. But I do think, truly do believe that we will see some European tour before the World match play.
Fingers crossed for that. Well, let's hear from our next guest on this week's show, and it is with the International Officer of the Hungarian Darts Federation, Eniko Harsanyi. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the International Officer for the Hungarian Darts Federation, Eniko Harsanyi. Thanks very much for the time. How are you doing?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm doing great, although I'm just at working hours in my other life, but I'm really honored to be here with you. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate your time, and this past weekend we saw the Budapest Classic, the Budapest Masters go ahead. I think there was around 59 men, 10 ladies and some youth events going on. How long has Hungary been able to have in-person tournaments on for now?
In about the last month or two, maybe, we started to organize our in-person events. And of course, due to the virus, we needed to introduce some protocols more likely to defend health conditions of our players and the team who organizes everything. And I have to admit that we are doing this because we would like to organize the European Youth Cup, which supposed to be happening last year. And it has been delayed with a year now, so there is still a chance that we can have it this year. And we wanted to check and test how we can organize an event like that with these new protocols. And I have to tell you that it was really a smooth fun.
Glad to hear. And what have been the main challenges then getting events on again during this pandemic? Because not a lot of countries have been able to start up again.
Right. First of all, it's our government who allows every sportsman to continue their trainings and to do their tournaments in their own sports. So we have to thank them first for allowing us. And the second one is that we have introduced. We introduced testing stations at the venues, which means that we have collected every player. We asked them to pre-register to see how many of them would like to participate. And based on the numbers, we have established 3 stations for COVID testing. And before we let anyone into the venue, inside the building, we made their testings, and only those who had the negative results could go inside. So that was the most important thing we introduced.
That brings me on to the next question, really. How are things in Hungary right now with the virus? Here in the UK, we're still in a lockdown. What are the restrictions like where you are?
Well, we are in a very bad condition. Currently, we have high rates of death as well, and also as for our considering the positive cases we have. So we do have curfew in place, but sportsmen are like exception, so they can go and travel and finish their tournaments and trainings if they have a certificate from their sports team that they are valid players.
Well, let's talk a little bit about you then. Where did your interest in darts come from? How did you discover darts?
It was like 20 years ago, and some of my friends were playing this game, and they introduced me to this one. And I have to admit that for the first 10 years, it was just for having some, leisure time together with my friends. And then I realized that there are some players joining the world of darts, and getting some results within 1-2 years, and I didn't like that because I was playing for 10 years and I didn't really have any result. So I decided to take it more seriously, and then I've changed my attitude, and then I started to do some trainings, and I received some results as well. So it was nice to see.
Excellent. Well, in more normal times, I guess, before the virus, what would a typical week look like for darts in Hungary? Do you have leagues running during the week, tournaments most weekends? What does it look like?
Sure, we do have leagues nationally and locally as well, because the Hungarian Darts Federation is the national federation for darts, and we also have some regional federations as well under the Hungarian Darts Federation. And so both federations organize events during the week and during the weekends as well. During the week, there are more like league type events, and during the weekends, we usually have the national events like individual pairs, teams, competitions, and we also have steel and soft tip darts in Hungary.
You mentioned the Hungarian Darts Federation. Of course, you've got a role there. You're the international officer. What does that role involve?
Well, I do have a role in the Budapest one as well. But yes, it means I'm the one who deals with all the international requests and issues we need to take care of, such as I'm the main contact for WDF, also the one who tries to help translating materials from English to Hungarian, or the other way around. And I'm also trying to keep good contact with the other nations. Whenever we have any international tournament, I try to participate so I can see what's happening out there, how other nations do, their tournaments in a different way, so we can learn or we can adapt some of the solutions the others do.
Well, let's look at more recent times then. 2018, Hungary hosted the WDF Europe Cup. I think we had 38 men's teams, 34 ladies teams I've got down here, all in Budapest. What was it like hosting a big event like that? Did it help put darts on the map in Hungary?
Definitely yes, and at first hand, the only word which comes to my mind is scaring, because everyone was really scared how we can cope with all the requirements and to run the event smoothly. But I think at the end, on the go, we've learned how to do that. And now we are a bit more confident, applying for organizing any other cups like Europe Cups or World Cups even in the future, because beforehand we only had youth tournaments in Hungary, and now we are more confident to have something like that.
We look forward to that, and we cross over to the PDC side of things. We have seen someone from Hungary quite often on the PDC stages. Daniella Bogdanoff, the first female stage official at a PDC TV tournament. She's done the World Championships as well. Have you followed her career in darts closely?
Well, yes, we've played against each other a lot of times. She's a female player, and in the female tournaments, from time to time we were playing against each other, and I have to admit that we are really proud of her, and she's a very nice person. She's very clever and very kind, and I am happy to know her.
Well, 2019, the PDC announced their calendar for 2020. They announced the first European Tour event was planned in Budapest for May 2020. Obviously, that didn't get to happen because of the virus. But going back to that announcement, how excited were darts fans in Hungary when the news came out that the European Tour was planning to come to Hungary for the first time?
Well, I have to correct you. It was not planned to do in Budapest, but in a very close little town near Budapest. It's called Érd. But nevertheless, everyone was so excited. Everyone wanted to have tickets to the event. Everyone was planning to, get holidays so they don't have to go to work, and so they can enjoy the full, event, the full experience. experience, and I'm really sad that we couldn't make it, because that would have been our first one, and we were well prepared. We wanted to do that, but unfortunately, COVID came, so we have to wait now.
Yeah, I mean, we've got no European Tour events announced yet for 2021, but hopefully when things do start to open up again, the European Tour will make its debut in Hungary. How special is that weekend going to be when it does eventually happen?
We would like to have it as soon as possible, and we would like to have it frequently, if that is an option, because we believe that in Hungary, people are more and more interested in this sport, and this sport can be really well presented on television, and therefore it has, it gets a wider acknowledgement, and so we can get some sponsors, we can get some viewerships if needed. So we really think that we could be center of the darts in Europe one day.
Fingers crossed for that. Well, one player that we could see that weekend when it does happen, Patrick Kovacs, just had a great weekend in the events in Budapest. I saw he had 100 average in one of the semi-finals as well. Is he the top player in Hungary right now, and who else should we be keeping an eye out on?
He is one of the tops, I would say. There are a few men who can do that level currently, and we are proud of him. And you may remember that WDF had the Virtual Cup, the first inaugural Virtual Cup last year, and he was also the one who won that one too. So we are really proud of him. But I have to tell you that we have some other players as well who are likely playing like who are like him in the level of darts.
We look forward to seeing them. And lastly, before we let you go, what's next on the calendar for 2021 for darts in Hungary? You mentioned earlier the Europe Youth Cup. You're hoping to still be able to put that on, but what have you got lined up for the rest of the year?
Well, this weekend we are going to have a youth tournament, because I think our youth players are really talented, and they would like to play as much as possible. And in order to do that, we are planning also another tournament, which will be an online one with the English Darts Federation, to just try our youth players against each other, just to get the feeling, even if they cannot meet in person yet. But also we'll be having the team competition shortly, the team adult competition, and also we are going to have a soft tournament playing cricket instead of 5-on-1.
Excellent. Well, plenty to look forward to. Keep up the great work that yourself and all the guys in Hungary are doing for darts, and we look forward to seeing that European Tour event one day happen as well.
Me too. It would be fantastic.
Thanks again to Eniko for joining us, and we'll finish up the show as always with some of your listener questions. The first one comes from Brendan Hoffman. He says, with all the technologies around now, YouTube coaches, training apps, cameras, etc., how long do you think it'd take someone who's keen AF to compete at a high level?
Wonder what AF stands for. I just don't think that really will make that much of a difference. I mean, it depends on how you define a high level. Obviously, it can help raise your game, and regardless whether you're as bad as one of us or have the potential to be a professional, having more tools in your locker and more ways to practice, more ways to study your throw, study your game, especially when you're starting out, can only, well, it can't hurt as well, but it definitely can help if you're doing it right. But it's not going to make you a professional when you have no talent, and it's not going to make you the world number one when you're just someone who's a pub league player. I don't think that this is going to help make anyone that much better, that much quicker. What helps make you better is competition, and the more you compete, the better you get, or the more you can at the very least lift your A game and more consistently reach whatever your A game is. That's the key. Competition makes you reach your peak better, but you're not going to become a great player if you're like you or I, no offense, you're just not that talented. I will never be a professional no matter how hard I work, no matter how much coaching I get, because I'm just not that good.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I guess really if we're going down the line of players at the top of the PDC order of merit, you need to pick up playing rugby, or you need to go to Deptford Market, buy a set of brass darts and start throwing them at trees, because that is what the top two players in the world right now did in their journey to becoming top players that they are now in the game. But it's a difficult one, isn't it? It's a good question, because it's going to be interesting to see what the conveyor belt of players coming through the game is like once this pandemic is over, because the routes into the game are different at the moment. There's not the pubs and clubs open at the minute. There's not the different opens, tournaments, leagues that people can play in. It is a case of buying a dartboard, setting it up in your room or wherever in your home and throwing darts, and try not to get bored, because a lot of people get bored just chucking it with no aim. So you do have to have that dedication. You do need to have that drive that a lot of the players have. And give a mention to one player, Jack Main. He didn't play the local scene. He went straight into the deep end, playing development tour, challenge tour, Q school. His results weren't the best, but he kept at it, and the pandemic came and he decided to put the hours in at practice at home. And look where he is now. He finished top of that UK Q school order of merit. He's now got his tour card and he's mixing it with the best in the world. So I guess during these times at the moment, if you do have that time to dedicate yourself and you do have a bit of talent, as you say, then yeah, I'm sure you can get to that level. But I think there is a ceiling for every player. And if you don't have that initial talent and you're not willing to put the hours in, then it's only going to take you so far.
And our next question comes from George Dobson. Who would you have as the favorite for the Premier League as of today? And we will give you more of our Premier League preview next week, but this is a preview of our preview.
Oh, that is a good one. Just looking at the title sponsors for this event, Unibet, and at the moment, when we're recording on this Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday evening, Going Price, Michael Van Gerwen, joint favourites 5-2, Peter Wright 7-2. They're the favourites with the bookmakers at the moment. If you're looking for a bit of value, and we spoke about it last week, I personally think Johnny Clayton is the form horse at the moment, and if he can take that form that he's shown over the last 3 months since the Masters, when he had that brilliant weekend, and the last couple of Pro Tour weeks, his odds of 12-1, I think they look very good. And I know he's a Premier League debutant, but last year we had a Premier League debutant finish top and win the whole thing, and we saw two of them in the final. And now that we know that all these events are going to be played at Milton Keynes behind closed doors for all of it, we're not quite sure, but he's probably going to start that way. It does make it very interesting how it's going to play out. But for me, I'd say I'm looking at Johnny Clayton as a favourite, and then the big three, Going Price, Michael Van Gerwen, Peter Wright. Aside from that, I don't think I'll be putting my 10p on anyone else just right now.
Yeah, hard to look past those four. I mean, you start with, who's struggling the most right now. It's probably the three English players. Glenn Durrant really been struggling since having COVID back in October. Rob Croft's been struggling for some time, but some signs he's getting back to his best. Nathan Aspinall also been struggling for some time now. Gary Anderson, yeah, he made the world final, but didn't light anyone up really at the World Championships, and hasn't really lighted anyone up so far this year. Dimitri Vandenberg has had some inconsistent results, but has had some really good performances. Those five, as what we've seen right now, they don't look likely to win the title. It comes down to Johnny Clayton, who you said is the form player, then the top three in the world in any given order, Gerwen, Price, Peter Wright, who both won titles this past weekend, Michael Van Gerwen, who isn't going to win a title this year, according to Peter Wright, early contender for tip of the year, tip of the century, if that one comes through. But I'll also throw in Jose de Sousa. He's playing fantastically. He's been playing fantastically for a while, and now he's, at the back end of last year, won 2 stage titles, one on the European Tour, and then, of course, the Grand Slam of darts. There is no reason on Premier League debut that he couldn't put himself in contention to win it all, because he's playing well enough to do so. I don't think he's the favorite. I don't know if I'm going to tip him yet. That'll be for next week's show, but I don't want to throw him out. I'm not going to throw him out with the bathwater because, well, 1, you shouldn't waste bathwater, and 2, he's a lot better than maybe his world ranking of number 15 right now says. Anything else for this week?
As always, we should say a big thank you to our guests for joining us. Big thank you to you for listening, and give a shout out as well to our sponsor, Low 6, who present this show. If you want to get involved in the low six, download the PDC Picks app. 18 plus UK residents only. T&Cs apply. Please gamble responsibly. BeGambleAware.org actually had a winner last week, £45. I won on one of their contests during the Super Series. So go and get involved in them. They've got a lot of different contests. A lot of them are free at the moment, so go and make the most of that. They've got some darts ones, some football ones, some horse racing ones. So download the app, have a go, and get your mates involved so you can do the better out of your mates. And who knows, maybe you'll be lucky like me and pick up a bit of prize money. We'll be back next week with our Premier League preview of the season. We'll hopefully try and get one or two of the players on as well. And last thing to mention as well, our darts trivia. Shout out to Darts fan 03 who came in with the answer pretty quickly. So well done to him. And here's Hannah with this week's trivia question.
This week's trivia question is, Peter Wright's title at the Super Series last week made that 10 consecutive years in a row that he has won a PDC senior title. Can you name the other players who have also won a PDC senior title 10 years in a row? Good luck.
Thank you, Hannah, for the question. And I'm surprised how quickly we got an answer, the correct answer for that question. I thought it was one of the more difficult ones that I had up my sleeve. And well, I still think it is, but that was a fantastic shout from Darts Fan 03. But anyway, thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our listeners, our guests, everyone. We'll be back, as Alex said, next week to preview the Premier League. Get going with will be our 5th Premier League picks competition. I think it's 2-2 between us, or are you up 3-1? I know there was 1 year I won at least.
I reckon it's 2-2, but I think I deserve some extra points for beating all of our listeners a couple of years ago. But I'm happy to go with 2-2.
Right. Yeah. I know I've won at least once. I'm not sure if I've won twice, but at the very least, by the end of this, you'll have at worst 2, hopefully 3, and maybe I'll win by enough that I get credit for 2 years this year. But we'll talk about that next week. Until then, you'll just have to hang tight.